so many times during a sexual encounter, our body is receiving touch, but we're in our heads. Am I going to come? Is he think I look okay? Or am I lasting long enough? Am I hard enough? If it's a man, all of this. And you cannot have an orgasm while your brain is focused like that. To have an orgasm requires being fully in your body. And the best way to learn that is in daily life, through a meditation practice, through a mindfulness practice, through yoga. There's research that women who do yoga have more orgasms. And I think it's because of the mindfulness it teaches. But I tell people, you don't have to go to yoga every day, or it's great if you do, or meditate every day. You can learn this skill in daily life.
Collective Insights is a voyage through topics and technologies revolutionizing human well-being. Groundbreaking approaches for a better world and a better life await you. Welcome to Collective Insights.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gregory Kelly. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to talk about one of the most important molecules in your body to help you age well. I'm talking about NAD+. High NAD+ levels help our bodies stay youthful in so many ways, such as creating energy, maintaining healthy DNA, detecting and using nutrients efficiently, and protecting your cellular health. But in our 30s and 40s, our NAD levels start to plummet. That's why our science team made Qualia NAD+. Qualia NAD+ is a clinically tested formula with an uncommonly advanced approach. It can boost NAD+ levels up to 50% by combining 14 key ingredients, including 3 premium NAD+ precursors, working together to support NAD+ production deep into life. To learn more about NAD+ research and to try Qualia NAD+ risk-free for 100 days, go to qualialife.com/NAD15 and use code NAD15 for 15% off Qualia. That's NAD15 for better aging at qualialife.com/NAD15.
I'm James Schmachtenberger, the CEO and co-founder of Qualia Life Sciences. I'll be your host today for this episode of Collective Insights. And today we are joined by Dr. Laurie Mintz. Dr. Mintz is an emeritus professor at University of Florida, teaching human sexuality to hundreds of undergraduates every year. She's authored 2 popular books with published studies demonstrating that readers actually enhance their sexual functioning. The one we'll be discussing today is Becoming Clitorate, Why Orgasm Equality Matters and How to Get It. And her other book is A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. Dr. Mintz is a licensed psychologist and certified sex therapist in private practice. She's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, showing the impact that her work has had on a national audience. And last year was named one of Forbes 50 over 50 women innovators. Dr. Mintz, thank you for joining. It's a delight to have you today.
It's delightful to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to dive into some of the content and the ideas, but before we do that, I'm just kind of personally curious, what inspired you to go into this field of study?
The field of sex therapy in general, or the specific topic of the book, or both?
Both.
Okay. So I've been a psychologist for about 34 years, and I got no training in sexual health and sex therapy during my graduate years. And as I got into private practice, I was always a professor and in private practice. I realized that I was comfortable with the topic of sex, thanks to probably my very unusually sex-positive mother. And so I would bring up the topic with my clients, or they would bring it up with me. And I realized I had no training, and I realized that there must be stuff out there. And right around the time I wrote my first book, I was a young mom, I had a stressful job, and so were most of my friends and clients at the time. And everyone started saying they were losing their sex drive. My clients, my friends, me. And I thought, there's got to be solutions out there. Why wasn't I taught these? So I did a deep dive into the clinical and research literature, and there were solutions, but not ones known to the lay public. I thought, this is what I need to write about. And that sort of set me on this whole course of only focusing on sexual things. and clients would come to me. And then I started teaching this class at the University of Florida, where I learned that the young women in my class had no idea about their anatomy. They had no idea about how to get pleasure. The men had no idea how to pleasure the woman. Everybody was feeling broken. And so I started teaching my class to the orgasm gap, the female orgasm, and my students really loved it. And I would get notes from my female students, thanks to the class, I'm orgasmic, from the men. And I thought, I'm going to write this in a book and not keep it to my classroom.
Awesome. Well, I'm delighted that you chose to focus in this area. I mean, this has been an area that I've been pretty devotedly and study around for about 15 years myself. And having focused on the domain quite a lot, there seems to be an uptick in attention in this space just in the last few years. And I think it's because of people like you that are actually starting to take some of the research that is known and bring it out to the masses.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, a lot of that research, right, stayed in science, and it's really people who need that information.
Right.
It shouldn't be in the just the journals, the psychological or science journals. So thank you for saying that.
So in your book, you talk a lot about orgasm equality and sort of closing the orgasm gap. I'd love to have you speak a little bit more about that, give listeners an understanding of what is orgasm equality.
Yeah. So orgasm equality is the opposite of the orgasm gap, right? So the orgasm gap, for those who don't know, right, it's the finding over 30 years of research that when women and men get it on, the women are having way fewer orgasms than the men. So orgasm equality doesn't mean every time you have a sexual encounter, you each have to have an orgasm or the same number of orgasms. It just means that we solve this cultural problem of the orgasm gap, because it is a cultural problem, not a biological problem. And it means that women's most reliable route to an orgasm, clitoral stimulation, is considered equally as important as men's most reliable route to orgasm, which is some kind of penile stimulation. So that's really the essence of orgasm equality.
Right. Yeah. So making it to where there's not the attempt to orgasm every single time necessarily, but that there's equal attention, equal priority on pleasure of both genders.
100%. Exactly. Yeah. And some people have said things to me like, oh, you've got it all wrong. I mean, women have more orgasms because they can have multiple orgasms. Like, it's not about bean counting. You got one, I got two, It's about the fact that it's so baked into our culture to not prioritize clitoral stimulation. Look at any movie, or most movies, most porn. They show intercourse, and they show both people orgasming that way. The words we use reflect that, sex and intercourse, as if they're one and the same. Right. Foreplay, just to lead up to the main event, which is, for women, the main event. And so it's really just leveling the playing field so both people's most surefire route to pleasure is equally as important, equally sex, if you will.
Yeah. That was actually one of the things I really appreciated about the book, was there was quite a bit of focus on redefining sex to be broader, right? Like you're saying, in most of culture, sex is intercourse, but there's so much more to sex.
Absolutely.
I think you did a really good job of being able to clarify and bring attention to that, like, sex is this whole domain that intercourse is a piece of, but that's not necessarily the center point, the goal. It's a beautiful aspect, but it's part of a bigger picture.
Absolutely. I love the way you said that. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. It's the whole encounter from start to finish, and that is just one part of it.
So with this book, you obviously focus a lot on the clitoris, right? Becoming clitorate. I mean, in some ways, I think this is obvious, but what caused you to focus on the clitoris?
Because people don't use the word, people don't know. Sometimes I can't believe, it's 2024 and we still don't know that most women need clitoral stimulation to experience orgasm. Only 4 to 18% of women orgasm from just penetration. And I'm not diminishing the way that those women orgasm, But what I can say is I've never had a woman come to my practice or my office hours who can orgasm from penetration. The rare woman saying, I'm having a problem orgasming during partner sex. Because of course she does, because that's how the heterosexual partner sex goes. But I have had so many women come to me, I can't orgasm during sex with my partner. And I say, well, what do you mean by sex with your partner? Well, intercourse. And the answer is so clear to me as a sex scientist, as a sex therapist, as a sex researcher, because women don't orgasm that way mostly. So that's what caused me to focus on this.
Yeah. How important do you tend to think it is for people to really understand the anatomy of the clitoris? From what I see out in popular culture, I mean, you still see comedians all the time talking about how people can't find the clitoris, right? So like even the basics of kind of like the endpoint, people don't seem to get. And then I think most people don't really have familiarity around the overall anatomy and how it's shaped, all the space that it takes up. When you talk about the clitoris, are you mostly talking about sort of like what's right underneath the clitoral hood, or are you?
That's such a great question. Thank you. So the clitoris is, as you know, a vast internal organ with only the hood and the glands on the outside. And most people don't know that. They think it's just what shows on the outside. And we know that, well, we don't know, but the science is pretty clear, although there's some disagreement, that even if a woman orgasms from stimulation of the vagina, it's because the internal clitoris is being stimulated. So all orgasms are clitoral. But when I'm talking about women needing clitoral stimulation to orgasm, I'm talking about external. I really would love to say all women need vulva stimulation of the inner lips, the clitoral hood, the mons pubis. But because most people don't even know what a vulva is,
right,
the truth is most women need external stimulation of the vulva, not just the clitoris. And mostly we don't want to touch the clitoral hood. It's too intense. There's like 10,000 nerve endings. But because people don't know what that is, it's sort of a shortcut to say clitoral stimulation. So I'm saying most women need external stimulation, not internal penetration to experience orgasm.
Right. Actually, you said something a minute ago I wanted to go a little bit deeper into. So you said that from your research, between 4 and 18% of women are able to have sex or have orgasms from intercourse. And I'm curious to hear more about that, because a lot of the research that I've seen is usually more around a third of women. But you made some distinctions in the book that I think are worth diving into.
Yeah. So the old research used to say, can you orgasm from intercourse? And about a third of women would say yes. But that was like, nobody asked those women, are you also getting your clitoris stimulated by touching yourself, by rubbing it against a partner's penis or body part in the woman on top position? So then the researchers came along and they started being more refined. They would say, can you orgasm from just a thrusting penis alone with no clitoral stimulation? And 15 to 18% of women said yes. But I got to thinking, well, that even draws people to say yes, because women want to orgasm that way. They think they should. And the question is sort of leading. It's about, can you do this thing, right? So I started asking women, and I have asked, at this point, it must be at least 10,000 women, because I wrote the book in 2017 based on about 6 or 7 years of data, and I've been collecting the data ever since at college campuses, every lecture I give, older women. And my question is simply, what's your most reliable route to orgasm? And only 4% say penetration alone. The rest say clitoral stimulation, either alone or coupled with penetration.
Right. No, I think that's really interesting. I think it's a thing worth bringing a lot of attention to. You spoke to it a little bit, but I think a lot of women not only think that they're supposed to be able to orgasm through intercourse, but have shame around the fact that they can't.
Yes.
Right. So getting to see the data the way that your research is presenting it, I think helps to normalize that that's actually not a reliable method of orgasm for most women.
Yeah. And honestly, I give a lot of talks all over the country, and I use anonymous polling, and you should see the faces. And this is college students, and this is even mental health professionals, like therapists who haven't been trained in this. And it's always consistent. Sometimes it's as low as 0%. It's anywhere from 0 to 5%. A lot of times it's more on the 2 or 3%. And I get notes like from not just college students, adults, psychologists, therapists saying, this made me feel less ashamed to know I'm not alone. And the other stat that I think is so compelling that helps women not feel alone is that when we ask women how they pleasure themselves, less than 2% do so exclusively by putting something in their vagina.
Really? Less than 2%? Less
than 2%. Wow. Yet with male partners, they suddenly think they should do orgasm this whole new way. Less than 2%. A lot of times it's more around 1%. I mean, they might put something in their vagina while they stimulate their clitoris, but exclusive self-stimulation just by penetration, less than 2%.
Right. And it strikes me that in this domain, part of what's important is knowledge, right? Understanding some of the things that we're talking about right now, understanding the importance of clitoral stimulation. But it also seems that big part of this is not maybe a knowledge issue as much as like a cultural and psychological issue.
Absolutely.
Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the cultural issue is that we don't have this knowledge, that it's not portrayed. It's not portrayed in the movies. It's not portrayed in porn. Women are sexualized, but their sexual pleasure isn't taught about, right? So that's the cultural issue, leaving women feeling ashamed, broken, faking orgasms. And then the personal issue is knowledge isn't enough. Like there is even a study that shows if you teach women about their clitoris, they orgasm more in masturbation, but it doesn't change partner sex at all because there's this deep cultural thing or message that our job is to be, women's job is to be there to please men rather than for our own pleasure. Or we have to make our male partners feel good who think that they should give us an orgasm that way. So it's not enough to just tell women this. You have to teach them how to communicate with partners, teach them to not feel ashamed, teach them to feel empowered. You have to teach men how this benefits them. I mean, it's hugely beneficial to men, right? Because, the research is also clear. Men feel pressure during sex to thrust long, last hard, last long. That detracts from men's pleasure. So if they know the truth, they can just focus on their pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find so fascinating about the way that, we'll say, normal sex happens is it's not usually particularly good for anyone involved, right? Like you said, men experience a bunch of pressure. They're in their heads the whole time, wondering if they're going to get hard enough, stay hard enough, pleasure her enough. And then women aren't getting the kinds of attention and stimulation that are necessary. And like for me as a man, and I found this to be true of most people that I talk to, the most exciting thing around sexuality is seeing the woman in pleasure. It's not necessarily the act of intercourse. It's the embodiment, the body movements, the sound, all of that create an experience that's, I would say for me, more exciting than my own orgasm.
Yeah. And that's so interesting. And I think that's very accurate. But many men don't they don't take a step back to think about that enough. And then, of course, if their partner is faking orgasm during intercourse, that just reinforces, this is the exciting part. But it reminds me of a couple new studies, or many new studies have come out since I wrote the book. And there's one that really underscores what you're talking about. A group of men were given a vibrator and they were told, use this with your partner twice a week for the next 3 months. And then they were interviewed and the men said, wow, the vibrator really made a difference in 4 ways. One is they said it increased intimacy because they had to talk about it. But the others were exactly what you talked about. The men said they were more excited. And they gave 3 reasons for their excitement. One was novelty. 2 was because their partner was more excited and they found that exciting. And so that's just what you said. And then the third part was the clitoris and the penis are made of the same tissue. They're both embryologically, they come from the same tissue. And they said, so if a woman was using a vibrator, they felt the vibrations, and that was really exciting to them because both penises and clitorises love the feeling of vibration.
Right. So I guess diving a little bit deeper into some of the cultural and psychological aspects, you talk in the book quite a bit about things around slut shaming, religious shame, around sexuality, and even things around how sex education in our country, and really I think most of the world, mostly focuses on dangers. I'd love to have you just speak more to why is that?
It's such a shame because we, here in the U.S. especially, in other countries, we tell lies during sex ed. We tell people it's dangerous, it's awful. And, it's all these bad things can happen. And even sex ed that is what's called comprehensive, they've never mentioned sex is supposed to be pleasurable. Pleasure is left out of sex education. And I think it goes back to our Puritan roots that, we shouldn't talk about sex. We shouldn't have pleasure. Goes back to some religious teachings, etc. And it's really a shame. It's like kids, I asked my students in my class, how many of you were ever told sex is supposed to be pleasurable? And almost no one was. And that's, it's not just for procreation anymore, right? That is a very rare reason people have sexual encounters. It's mostly for pleasure.
Right. So how do we shift that?
I'm trying. You're trying. I think we do so by continuing to have these kind of conversations, continuing to have this in magazines and books and podcasts. And I don't think this is going to happen in my lifetime, I'm sorry to say, but I think the real way to solve the problem is through sex education, by reforming our sex education curriculum. In the Netherlands, they start sex ed just like they start math, right? In kindergarten, it goes all the way through, 12th grade, and it gets increasingly sophisticated, just like math. You get 1 + 1 in, maybe kindergarten, first grade, and you get, geometry, algebra in high school. And that's what they do with sex ed. And they talk about the pleasure. They talk about consent. They talk about anatomy. They talk about orgasms. And guess what? They have less of an orgasm gap, and they even have less sexual assault than we do. Because I think part of it is because they teach consent, but I think this goes way beyond pleasure. If you teach women that sex is something for them rather than is done to them, and you teach men the same thing, sex is a shared pleasure rather than something you do to someone, you're going to have less coercion and assault.
Right. Yeah, no, I find that area really interesting. I don't remember the specifics, but there was a study I had seen a few years ago looking at the rates of sexual violence in different countries and then looking at it in correlation to the degree of sexual repression. Mm-hmm. And any of the countries that had higher rates of sexual repression, the more ideology that it was bad, evil, only for procreation, etc., you had significantly higher rates of sexual assault. And the countries that were more sex positive, sexually liberated had progressively lower amounts.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's that I know that study, but I don't remember exactly who wrote it or where it was published, but I know the study, and it's right. It makes so much sense. Yeah. But it's so sad, right?
Oh, it's terrible. But it's also interesting, right? It says that one of the major problems facing the world can be addressed through leaning into sexuality more, being more sex positive, having more open conversation, creating more permission around it. So it's sad to see it, but it also then speaks to the opportunity for how that can evolve.
Absolutely. And it's I mean, it to me, it's similar to teen pregnancy rates, right? I mean, the same principle. that teen pregnancy rates are highest in states where they have strict abstinence only education. And they're, so it's like, the solution to teen pregnancy, to STIs, to partially to sexual assault is sex positive education, where we talk about pleasure, consent, communication, porn literacy.
Yeah. Say more on that, because that's not a term I hear very often.
Porn literacy. It's teaching people that porn is entertainment, not education. Because in the absence of sex ed, where kids are turning to the internet, they're turning to porn to learn about sex. And I didn't say this, but I've quoted it many times, and I don't know who to attribute this to. But the way we're teaching our young people to have sex would be like putting them in front of a Fast and Furious movie and saying, this is how you drive.
Right.
I mean, that's exactly what we're doing. And so they're learning dangerous things. They're learning false things. Since the book was published, there has been some great research by Debbie Herbenek, who has found that the rate of non-consensual choking and strangulation is up, which is really dangerous, because people can get brain damage. It's really dangerous practice, but apparently it's all over porn. And so young people, men, and I've talked to my students about this, the men think, oh, women like this. So they do it without asking, and the women think they're supposed to like it. And so it's just, we're giving people entertainment, false entertainment for education.
Yeah.
Porn literacy is teaching people that this is false, basically.
Yeah. So, to me, part of that is an issue of education, right? Recognizing that porn is not how sex occurs, right? It's, like you said, it's entertainment, it's not education. Because people are thinking of it as education, they're just going out and choking people as though that's a thing to do without conversation. But the other piece that strikes me around that is that one of the things that I think has happened in porn kind of progressively over the years is it's become more and more extreme, right? And I think that a lot of the extremeness that you see there is also directly correlated to the amount of repression and fear and shame that people hold around sexuality. If most of your desire, if most of the impulse for pleasure is held inside and not able to be talked about, then when there is an opportunity to explore it, you try to go for the most calorically dense version possible, i.e. extreme.
Yeah. And that's a brilliant point. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I like the metaphor. It's kind of like, I remember when my kids were little reading a study that if you restrict all of their desserts and sugar and all of that at home, when they go to their friends' houses where it's allowed, they're going to just binge like crazy rather than learn okay, I'll have one cookie and then I'll be satisfied. I mean, I think that you bring that, it's a great metaphor for this.
Well, you see the same things a lot with drugs and alcohol, right? Kids who grow up in very strict households who aren't allowed to try anything and are told that it's all bad and terrible, as soon as they get out of their house, have a tendency of going quite far off the deep end.
Yeah.
It's who are brought up with a little bit more moderation and understanding and recognizing that, drug abuse is an issue, but some use of drugs or alcohol is reasonable and we have context. They don't go through that wild swing afterwards.
Yeah. And it's really all so interconnected, isn't it? But giving people accurate information, how can that ever be harmful? Giving them access to accurate information in the opportunity to try things safely. In the Netherlands, I referred to their sex ed, but the other thing that happens in the Netherlands is parents tell their children, we don't want you having sex in cars. When people have their first girlfriend or boyfriend, they're invited to sleep over when they're ready for sex at the parent's home.
Right. Which shows acceptance. It shows that it's okay and allowable, and therefore there's less shame, there's less repression.
Exactly. Yeah.
So going back to the book a little bit, one of the things that you talked about that I was really happy to see you bring into the conversation is the role of mindfulness and how that impacts sexuality. And I'd love to have you speak to that a bit.
Oh, I'd love to. It's one of my favorite topics. So basically, our human mind is quite brilliant, right? It can move. It can think ahead to plan. It can think backwards to learn from our mistakes. And we're often doing that. When we're not, our head and our body are not in the same place and time. And that's what mindfulness is being, and even more embodiment, is being fully in your body. I love to use the metaphor of a roller coaster. If you've ever ridden one, whether you like it or hate it, while you're getting buckled up, your mind's going crazy. Oh my gosh, is this buckle going to break? Am I going to vomit? Am I going to get stuck upside down? But when you are flying downhill, your mind stops. You are only feeling the sensations in your body. And that is that captures embodiment and mindfulness. And so many times during a sexual encounter, our body is receiving touch, but we're in our head. Am I going to come? Does he think I look okay? Or am I lasting long enough? Am I hard enough? If it's a man, all of this. And you cannot have an orgasm while your brain is focused like that. To have an orgasm requires being fully in your body. And the best way to learn that is in daily life, through a meditation practice, through a mindfulness practice, through yoga. There's research that women who do yoga have more orgasms. And I think it's because of the mindfulness it teaches. But I tell people, you don't have to go to yoga every day, or it's great if you do, or meditate every day. You can learn this skill in daily life. The next time you're brushing your teeth, for example, really focus on the feeling in the mouth, the sensations, the taste. And when your mind wanders, bring it back to the sensations, because everybody's mind will wander even during sex. But the key is noticing it and bringing it back to the sensations.
Right. So, all right. So having a regular embodiment or mindfulness practice is a key way to improve the sexual experience and increase orgasms.
Yes.
I'm curious what you find most useful in terms of in the moment or sort of the time leading up to sexuality. Right? So there's, having a morning practice, but then what kinds of practices, either individually or partnered, have you found are most useful in the lead up to sex to be able to kind of drop out of the brain, get into a more embodied state?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think it varies for people, but I think I like to talk about sex lately as a drive around the block, basically, where the first part is just what you're talking about. It's getting connected to each other, getting connected to your body, maybe kissing, caressing, really getting intimate and connected, and with your partner and your body sensations, really warming up as you feel your partner's kiss or touch. And then this is getting rid of that script where everybody orgasms at the same time. And we can change the streets up, but then the next turn is her pleasure. It's all about a focus on her, oral sex, manual stimulation, vibrator stimulation. And like you say, she gets excited, the man gets excited by that. Maybe she has her orgasm. Then we turn down the next street and the man has maybe penetration or something else for him where he has his orgasm. And when you're on your street, you're fully in your body. You're not worried about how the other person is. And then the next street is the cuddles, the kiss, the caress, the processing, the holding. How was that? That's the whole sexual encounter. It includes the warm up, the pleasure. But I think getting into your body in the beginning stage on that first street, through the hugging, the kissing, the caressing, and different people have different views about substances, right? And we know that alcohol, some people drink a lot before sex because of the shame and they want to decrease their inhibitions. But alcohol is actually it makes you think you're hornier. It's a central nervous system depressant. So a lot of times it will actually decrease your sexual arousal. But I can't help but say I have a few clients that they need something to take that nervous edge off. So they might have a little alcohol or, smoke some pot or something like that. I'm not suggesting that everyone should do that, but I am saying, or watch a little erotica together. But I am saying, like, within moderation, whatever you need to do to turn off your brain and take it into your body, as long as it's within reason and moderate, I advocate for that.
Yeah. No, I agree. Personally, my view is that the majority of sexuality should be sober so that there's presence, but there's no question that the right use of certain kinds of substances can also alter and enhance experiences in particular ways.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm saying the exact same thing. But mostly, and some people they like to go exercise first because that gets them back in their body. It also gets the blood flowing. And we know blood flow to the genitals is essential for orgasm. So for some people, their best sexual encounter is right after they take a run or take a bike ride or go to the gym. So whatever you need to do to get into your body focus.
Right. In my research, I found that as well, that some type of exercise before sex tends to actually have a pretty significant positive impact. And I think sex is profoundly under-prioritized in culture. Mm-hmm. And I think a key area where, like any important thing, you might prepare for it, right? If you're going to go on media or you're going to go out to a dinner, you're going to take time beforehand and do hair and makeup and shower and whatever, right? I think if we give sex the priority that it deserves in culture, then it actually, at that point, makes a lot of sense to spend time and prepare to have the most meaningful, most pleasurable experience possible. And so that can often look like exercising first, doing some breath work first, whatever practice it is for the individual that creates the most embodiment.
I love that. And I think that gives us something else. I know we're mostly talking about orgasm equality in my second book, but I mean, I love what you said about giving it priority. And often when long-term couples get into a low or a no-sex marriage, it's also because they didn't prioritize it. They didn't schedule it. They didn't put it on the calendar, make room for it in their busy lives. Like, I often say, like, you and I didn't just happen to show up on this podcast recording at 5:00. Like, we planned this months in advance. We both put it in our calendars. We both got ready for it. We prioritized it. And the same goes for work or an exercise class. We make room for it. We prioritize it. But long-term couples somehow don't carve out time for sex and think it should just happen. And one of the most empirically supported sex therapy techniques is to ask couples to carve out time for sex.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, one of the things I most want to see in the world is people prioritizing sexuality more. And not from a, hedonistic perspective, but like when you really get into it and you understand all of the psychological benefits, physiological benefits, social benefits, it's actually an area genuinely worth putting time, energy, priority into in a way that isn't kind of standard within culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the way you say that. And I think it's healthy. I mean, people spend a lot of time, right, on other things to enhance their health, or hopefully they are: meditation, exercise, eating right. But this is also healthy. It's healthy for your relationship. It's healthy for your sleep. It's healthy for your heart. It's healthy for your genital health. I mean, it's just healthy overall, but people don't put it on the list of health enhancing behaviors.
Right. I've actually been starting to see a little bit of a shift around that, like looking at all the content that's coming about in the sort of biohacking health and wellness space. I would say, particularly over the last couple of years, there's starting to be a little bit of a shift towards conversations around sex becoming more prevalent and actually thinking of it as a core aspect of health. Still really early, but I'm super happy to see that evolution seems to be underway.
Yeah, I am too. I've seen it too. I think it's great. I still think we have a long way to go on all of this, but at least progress is being made.
Yeah. One other area we didn't really touch on, but you touched on in your book, is the importance of communication and sexuality. I was thinking about it as we were talking about, like, what are some of the things that you can do in preparation for sex to have the best sex? And like, for me, one of the things that I've found in my own life, but also in conversation with a lot of other people, is that talking about sex ahead of time, desires, fears, what's in the way, what's blocking, allows for the monkey mind to kind of quiet and shut off.
Yes, absolutely.
And support the embodiment process. So I think there's that value, but I think there's a lot more, and love to get your...
Yes. But yeah, communication is essential. Like, it's so underestimated. Like, in the research, as you're saying, is so clear. Couples who talk about sex have better sex. And people need to communicate about sex. And I have a whole chapter in both my books on communication. That's how important I think it is, right? That people need to talk about sex outside of the bedroom. I call that kitchen table sex talk. They don't have to be at the kitchen table. They can be on a walk. They can be on the couch. But talking about how your sex life is, how you want it to be better, what you like outside of the bedroom, essential. Talking before sex, it's not only important for consent, but, you can have conversations like, what do we want to do? What are you in the mood for? Talking during sex with actual, yes, you can use nonverbal moans, groans, but actual words. I had one client say, I didn't know that was allowed. I'm like, you think the sex police are going to arrest you? Like, I was, we were joking. She's like, but I've never seen it modeled in a movie. But like, wait, ouch, that hurts, or that's not comfortable, or move, or, ooh, keep doing that. Ooh, right there, harder, softer. And then talking after sex. How was that for you? How could it have been better? All of those are essential to a good sex life.
Unquestionably. Yeah, another piece that I would just love to see happening more and more in society.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So we covered a decent amount of territory so far, but as we move towards a close, any kind of final thoughts on how we both individually and as a culture close the orgasm gap?
Well, I think as a culture, it has to be sex education, but like they have in the Netherlands, but we're not going to get there, I don't think. So we're doing it right now. Talk about it. And I would encourage, listeners, talk about this podcast with your friends. Like, hey, do you know about the orgasm gap? Do you know why we have it? And I also, the next time you're watching a movie with friends and there's this scene where a woman has an instant orgasm from penetration, turn the movie off, pause it and go, wow, that's really a myth. That's unrealistic. Just bring up conversations. And then individually, for women, masturbate, learn what you like alone. The most essential step to an orgasm with a partner is getting the same type of stimulation you have alone. Talk to your partner about it. Don't fake. You're teaching your partner exactly what not to do. And, just understand that however you orgasm is beautiful and it's your way. And just to be honest, to share that with a partner and understand that most women need external stimulation to do so.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest reason we have the orgasm gap, is women are not getting that.
I really appreciate everything you said, but the fact that you do have a focus on encouraging masturbation and self-pleasure, right? Because we're talking about the importance of communicating, part of which is communicating what you like, but it's really hard to communicate what you like if you don't actually know what you like.
Absolutely.
It's so much easier to figure that out for most people on their own without the pressure of what you think you're supposed to be doing. Are you doing it right? Like, when there's the ability to just explore sensation and actually really refine what works, not only does that tend to create more turn on, but it also creates insight to then be able to share to have better sex with your partner.
Absolutely. In fact, it's also a great place to practice mindfulness, because when you're with only yourself, there's less stimulation of this other person to worry about. Are they having fun? Do I look okay? It's just you. So it's a really great place to practice that as well. And in fact, the most scientifically supported technique to help a woman who's never had an orgasm is to send her home with instructions to masturbate.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, before we close, if people want to learn more about your work and I guess just more about how to understand pleasure and evolve in general, where would you point them?
I would point them to my website, which is www.drlauriemintz.com, DRLAURIEMINTZ. And from there, there's links to both my books, which you can get on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie bookstores, anywhere books are sold. And as well, I do a lot of, I think, bite-sized sexual education on Instagram. So my Instagram is linked there, as is my Facebook, etc. So that's where people can find me and my work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a delightful conversation, delightful topic, and really glad we got to have you on today.
Me too. I'm really glad I got to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease, or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional, herbal, or homeopathic supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guests' qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.